Hello everyone from 510. Hope everyone's doing well. I thought I'd switch things up a little bit and give us a video recap of this week, with this week's topic being literacy. Plenty of stuff to go over. I thought it was a pretty fascinating week of discussion and reading. I certainly enjoyed it and I loved hearing from everyone. So I thought that I will break things down in terms of the whole language versus decoding strategies debate, which, as we've learned, is not so much of a debate. We'll get into that. I'll kind of analyze and take my main thoughts from Dr. Reed's talk with Dr. Sun, and then I'll go over some of the more interesting points that I thought were brought up by you all in the discussion forums this week. So, first off, the whole language versus decoding strategies. As we saw, whole language being, learning to read through reading stories, and basically literacy training ending there, kind of a process of learning how to read, learning strategies through just reading itself, right? Pretty self-explanatory. But as Presley and their colleagues explained to us, that there are tons and tons of benefits that we can teach our students through decoding strategies, whether that is phonemic awareness in terms of breaking down words, different sounds, so we can learn how to read new words that we come across, for example, or such things such as letter-sound relationships, knowing different narrative elements, and general world knowledge, that we can relate all the texts and all the different mediums that we encounter in class and relate that to different strategies that we can learn and teach our students through direct instruction. So, the excellent primary school teachers that Presley and their colleagues talked about in the article really filled their school and their instruction with all types of reading and writing, and then they balanced that whole language and explicit teaching of skills, and they really tried to build a connection through lessons. So I think that seems to be a great way to think about, and as we saw from our classmates here, ways that we have really gone about teaching literacy in the classroom. So, and another thing that I talked about, and another theme, was that your teaching decoding strategies really doesn't have to have a set start and end point, right? We saw examples of preschool age students beginning to learn phonetic sounds through objects in their home, I love the example of having letters on a refrigerator door, and just kind of through their listening and speech, they're already starting to learn that phonemic, that phonemic awareness and those skills. And then really there isn't a time where you have to end teaching literary strategies and decoding strategies. A lot of times people think that middle schoolers and then high schoolers are ready to read, ready to decode whatever text or film or video that they are studying. However, there is a real benefit from continuing to teach those different strategies. And a few that the adult comprehension strategies that Presley talked about are backtracking or rereading, your restatement and rephrasing, formulating, solving a problem, predicting, incorporating imagery into your summaries and all that stuff. And I think that what I took away from that is that when we are teaching those strategies, whether it's to middle school, high school, or older students, we're really trying to get that metacognition in the reading phase. Thinking about, how am I reading this? How am I thinking and breaking down this information, which will hopefully allow them to be better readers, better note takers, and ultimately understand the material better. Definitely was an interesting thing, thinking about how I was reading the article that was talking about how to effectively read. But that's a good transition for Dr. Sun's talk with Dr. Reed, where they talked a lot about, and this is what Dr. Reed has studied extensively, multimodal literacy. So we've really expanded our definition of literacy to include anything that really involves communication, right? So reading, writing, listening, and speaking. So your oral and your listening skills go in there, but also things such as dance, such as film, such as moving pictures and images, body language, and anything in between, right? So that's definitely a big thing that you can incorporate into your classroom, is teaching that literacy in a multimodal lens. And I know a lot of us are in 514 as well, but trying to incorporate different mediums, different materials that really allow students to become flexible and effective learners across a variety of different topics and different ways to express ideas is only going to help them become a more well-rounded learner in the end, right? One thing I thought interesting that Dr. Reed said is that, certain ways of reading and writing in a community will show what the power structures go along with in that community. So, how are we defining what the standard English is in a community? What is a standard way of communicating? Because it's going to be different in different places. It's going to be different with different students and how they communicate. It's going to be different with different students who prefer, as she mentioned, somebody who really likes to draw in class. Or they getting the opportunity to showcase those skills and their preferences and their, the pleasure that they get from drawing, and how can those different strategies and different ways of communicating be integrated into class is a good way to learn about literacy. So, what else do I have here? Yeah, another thing Dr. Reed says is that a lot of texts haven't changed in English language arts for a long time, so it's good to incorporate new things, new materials, and new ways, different mediums of different material that we're bringing into the class. And Dr. Reed also definitely agreed that the whole language versus decoding strategy is not a binary. Your reading, writing, speaking, listening is about meaning making. So you have to have that important connection with your students, and the more ways you can do that and the more ways your students are comfortable communicating through different forms, once again, the better off they're going to be. And she also said that when we think about, how we're integrating literacy into different content areas, we're going to be closer to having an answer to the why question with everything that we teach. So why are we doing this lesson? Why are we using this material? If we think about, we're teaching a specific literary skill in terms of how we can interpret a piece of ballet theater, for example, then if we kind of dive into those questions, have that in the back of our mind as we're planning and implementing lessons, then I think we're going to be better off as teachers. Also, that seems like just a fun way to teach. I think a lot of people, if they have to stand in front of the class, talk the whole time, lecture and be, accountable for having every answer, every bit of information throughout a school year, then it's not going to be very effective, right? Okay, so I know I'm going on here. I'm going to keep going with just a few of the things that stood out to me from our class discussions. For example, Claire said, she viewed multimodal literacy as a means for inclusion and getting students' voices to shine. And that goes along with Dr. Reed's example of a student who really liked to draw, becoming empowered in class when an assignment was geared towards their strength, and so they felt empowered. And then that's just going to improve the artistic and imagery related skills that other students have. Well, that student who took the reins in the class felt empowered, and the next day and the next week they're going to come into class feeling good and continue to have a positive attitude when they walk through the door. I thought that was interesting. Shannon talked about literacy in relation to chemistry, and I responded to her saying that chemistry was a subject that I was very poor at in high school, and just those balancing of those equations is something that I really had a hard time wrapping my head around, and I really struggled in that class. And if there were different ways to think about and present just those balancing those equations in chemistry class, perhaps I could have had a better time, or just having exposure to different ways to thinking about that could have led to maybe some more enjoyment for me in the class from a personal standpoint. I really enjoyed hearing from Patrick about how literacy is related to music notes. That's another language, another reading and writing music is another way that we can look at literacy, and how do we teach that when it's, relating a certain sound, training our ears, and then also, having sheet music in front of us is a great way that reading music can definitely help us in other content areas as well. Let's see. I thought Spencer made a great point when he said that we need to, as teachers, take ownership of the full spectrum of teaching. And I thought it was great how he said we need to teach students how to cook and not just feed them. So I thought that was great, and that goes along with teaching these decoding strategies, so that eventually whatever a student has put in front of them, hopefully they have the skills to take a step back, get that executive function, those meta cognitive processes flowing, think about what's the best way to go about analyzing whatever they have in front of them, whether it's visual, an oral piece, or a piece of writing, or what have you, and really, give power to those students and just learn some new skills. And lastly, something I thought that was an important topic to have in this literacy discussion is media literacy. Multiple people, whether it was Bronson, and I know Kelly, we were talking about it, that with all the use of technology that we have at our fingertips, I know a lot of students now have access to Chromebooks in the classroom to use for a multitude of purposes. What are the best technology literacy practices that we have? And also, what are the best practices in terms of going about researching things on the internet? How do we weed through all the information that's presented to us? How do we best phrase our searches in search engines? How do we find trustworthy news sources and trustworthy thought leaders? How do we depict all the information that we are getting, even through social media or reading news? And how can we analyze how the media presents different current events, all for the purpose of thinking critically whenever we are, looking at news or online bits of information when we're doing research, and all the things there. So a few of us had the conversation that we're not quite sure when and where to integrate specific media literacy training. However, I think it can be relevant in a ton of different content areas. If we're using technology to do research on the internet, or if we are in a social studies class or history class looking at current events, that's another lens that I think is very important for us to have. Because as we are just getting absolutely swamped with information, whether it's, in a very relaxed sense, scrolling through social media, or for a more academic purpose, doing online research. Those skills, and the earlier we have it, and the earlier we can teach our students and just allow them to take a step back and think about how they're going about consuming media, and also doing a lot of investigative stuff online, I think once again they're going to be better placed and be more media literate, allowing them to think critically in a number of different ways, whether that's in the classroom or outside of it. This has been a bit of a ramble. I'm coming up on 13 and a half minutes here. I think I'm going to leave it with that. Once again, if anybody has any questions or other thoughts, feel free to add them below here. Otherwise, I know we're going to move on. But once again, thank you to Dr. Reed and Dr. Sun, and I really enjoyed hearing everyone's thoughts on this topic, and looking forward to rolling on through the semester.